In this video, I would like to explain the basic principles of how horses learn, because I think these principles are really important to know for everyone who is involved with horses. So first, let me say that learning happens all the time. It is not only limited to training sessions. Horses learn from every interaction with their environment. And one very important thing to realize is that we are also a part of their environment. It means that horses learn also during things like veterinary and husbandry procedures, and also during other activities that we do with horses, during all the time we spend with our horses. It doesn't matter if we are aware of the learning process or not. Speaking about veterinary and husbandry procedures, in so-called problem horses, who always try their best to avoid these procedures, learning is, at least according to my experience, always a part of this problem. Even if it's not always recognized as a part of this problem, it is always there. And in order to be able to prevent these problems or to solve them, we have to be aware of the learning process and we need to know how it works. Knowing how horses learn is very important for everyone who has to or wants to deal with them at some point. Now let's have a look at what is learning. So what is learning? Simply said, learning is one of the functions of the brain. Learning is necessary for adaptation to the environment. It is not only necessary for surviving, but also for thriving in this world. Learning literally changes the structure of the brain by creating new pathways between the neurons. So it physically changes the structure of the brain. What is really important is that learning never stops. And last but not the least, learning is fascinating, at least for me. So this is why I decided to create this video for you, to tell you something more about how horses learn. Now let's have a look at how horses actually learn. So how horses learn, the learning process, the entire learning process consists of many types of learning. Here I am going to talk just about some of them, just about these that are, according to my opinion, the most relevant to horse training and to handling equine patients. So horses learn new behavior through the type of learning called operant conditioning. So operant conditioning is the first type of learning that I will be speaking about. Now what is it? Simply said, operant conditioning is a trial and error learning. Horses learn through the consequences of their behavior. If the consequences are good, horses will repeat that particular behavior more often in the future. On the other hand, if the consequences are bad, horses will not want to repeat that behavior. Good consequences are called reinforcements, and bad consequences are called punishments. So I know that there are many complicated definitions and information out there about how horses learn and how do they learn new behavior. But basically, if you understand this, if you understand these few simple principles, you are going to understand why horses repeat some behavior more often while they don't want to repeat another behavior, or they don't want to go to a certain place, they don't want to complete a certain task, and so on. So speaking about the consequences, there are 4 types of these consequences of the behavior. There is positive reinforcement, negative punishment, negative reinforcement, and positive punishment. These things, these consequences, are called the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. Now I'm going to go through each of the quadrants and I will be explaining what do they mean. So let's start with positive reinforcement. You may have heard about positive reinforcement training, or maybe you already practice positive reinforcement training with your horse, which is great. And now let's have a look at a principle that positive reinforcement training is based on. So, what is positive reinforcement? It means that as a consequence of their behavior, horses get something they want or need to survive or thrive, like food, water, or presence of herd mates, for example. In practice, it means that if you give your horse treat for doing some behavior, the horse will want to do this behavior more often in the future in order to get more treats. Now, positive in the context of operant conditioning doesn't mean good. It simply means adding or getting or gaining something. It means plus something. Reinforcement is the good consequence, as I already said, and it means making the behavior stronger. The horse is going to repeat this behavior more likely in the future. Now, another of the quadrants of operant conditioning is negative punishment. Negative punishment means that as a consequence of their behavior, horses lose or don't get something they want or need, or that they lose access to it. It can be, again, food, water, or presence of herd mates, for example. Again, in the context of operant conditioning, negative doesn't mean bad. It means removing or not getting something or not getting an access to something. And punishment, as I already said, the bad consequence, the unpleasant consequence of some behavior. It means that the horse is going to repeat this behavior less likely in the future. Another quadrant of operant conditioning is called negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement means that as a consequence of their behavior, horses get rid of something unpleasant, which is usually pressure, both physical and psychological. And it can be also pain or whatever the horse finds unpleasant. The majority of horse training is based on negative reinforcement. It's the pressure and release, simply said. Negative here means removing or not getting an access to something or getting rid of something, getting rid of a pressure of pulling from the lead rope of whatever type of pressure. Reinforcement means making the behavior stronger, as you already know. So the horse is going to repeat this behavior more often and more likely in the future. So once the horse finds out how to get rid of a pressure or pain or whatever, he will always try to do it. The last of the quadrants is called positive punishment. Positive punishment means that as a consequence of their behavior, horses get something unpleasant, which is usually pressure or pain. When we speak about punishment in general, we usually mean positive punishment. And now you can clearly see that positive doesn't mean good at all. You already know that positive in terms of operant conditioning means adding or getting something, and here it's connected with punishment. So punishment is an unpleasant consequence of some behavior, which means that the horse is going to repeat this behavior less likely in the future because the behavior was punished. So that was operant conditioning. It was the way how horses learn new behavior. And now let's have a look at another type of learning, which is classical conditioning. It's not so much about learning or performing a certain behavior. It is about connecting emotions to certain stimuli and events and about recalling these emotions. I will explain this later. Unlike operant conditioning, classical conditioning is an involuntary learning process. It doesn't require the horse to think. Horses, of course, cannot decide, and neither can we, when to feel which emotions and what are they going to like and what are they going to dislike or hate. So let's have a look at some examples. Let's say that the horse feels fear during the veterinarian's appointment, and the horse connects his fear to the presence of a vet. Next time, when the horse sees the vet, his fear will come up immediately. And then the horse becomes stressed, becomes restless, or may become hard to catch, and it is all because the underlying emotional connection that the horse creates to the presence of a vet or to a certain vet procedure. Or let's have a look at another example. Let's say that every time the horse sees someone coming to him with a bucket, he gets food from this bucket. So the next time the horse sees someone coming with a bucket, he becomes excited because he's expecting something good to happen. So it was classical conditioning in a nutshell. And now let's have a look at another type of learning, or better to say, another two types of learning, which is habituation and sensitization. These are simple forms of learning, and the reason why I am speaking about them at once is that they are each other's opposite. Very simply said, habituation means getting used to. So every time the horse gets used to something, it's due to habituation. It's due to this simple form of learning. And on the other hand, sensitization means getting more sensitive or responsive to something. And there are certain things that we need our horses to habituate to, such as vet and husbandry procedures, and there are also certain things that we need our horses to sensitize to, such as our cues, when riding or when working with horses. Now you may be wondering, how can you tell what happens when? Is the horse learning through habituation or sensitization right now? Or is the horse learning through classical conditioning or operant conditioning? How can you tell? So, the thing is that I had to speak about these learning types separately, otherwise it would be a big mess. But in fact, they are not separate. Almost every time they happen at the same time. So the horse is learning through habituation or sensitization, plus the horse is learning through classical conditioning, plus the horse is learning through a certain quadrant of operant conditioning. These types of learning are like layers. To be successful in our training and to communicate with our horses so that they can understand us, we really need to work with all these layers. It is also really important to know that all horses are capable of all these types of learning. It is not that positive reinforcement is only for some horses and pressure and release is only for some horses. Certainly, some horses will be better with positive reinforcement, or some horses will not tolerate pressure and release training at all, while some horses will be quite comfortable with pressure and release training. But all horses are capable of all types of learning because this is how their brain works. If you remember what I said in the beginning of this video, that learning is one of the functions of the brain, it means that each part of learning is in fact one of the functions of the brain. The better you know how horses learn, and the better you can fit your training methods to the natural process of learning, the more successfully you will communicate with your horses. Training is about creating a common language, and creating a common language happens through learning. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you understand how horses learn. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and also make sure to follow Vet Care Training on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for watching.